This submission is a passionate political monologue criticizing Naftali Bennett's alliance with Yesh Atid by leveraging an alleged offer made to Yoav Segalovitz by the Raam party to accuse Bennett of abandoning his right-wing roots. But looking at how that central accusation is built, I have to ask, while the contrast is vivid, does the text do enough to connect the actions of a third party directly to Bennett's own moral culpability?
The causal link connecting a third-party offer to the primary target's moral failing requires firmer scaffolding to maximize its persuasive impact.
Right.
Because, that is exactly where the friction lies in this text. The material actually makes a really strong initial case for Bennett's ideological shift by highlighting a stark historical contrast.
Yeah, you have his past as the head of Yesha Council.
I'd list with Yesh Atid, but then the script suddenly pivots to what the author calls the real drama.
Which is the revelation that Yesh Atid's Yoav Segalovitz received an official offer for a spot on the Raam list, the Islamic movement.
Right, and the weakness here is that the script jumps incredibly rapidly from the premise that Segalovitz received an offer straight to the conclusion that Bennett himself is now actively allying with those forces.
It's like they're attempting to transfer the weight of that offer directly onto Bennett's shoulders.
Yes, and as a reader, you completely understand the guilt by association tactic the author is deploying, but the logical chain is missing a crucial load-bearing link.
Because Segalovitz merely received an offer.
Precisely. The text doesn't establish that he accepted it, nor does it prove that Bennett orchestrated it or even desired it. So by relying solely on the mere existence of this third-party offer as the definitive proof of Bennett's ultimate betrayal, well, the argument just leaves a massive gap.
A gap that skeptical listeners could easily dismiss.
Absolutely. They could just wave it away as an exaggerated leap in logic.
But, I want to push back on the necessity of that logical scaffolding for a second, just to explore the reality of this specific genre.
Sure, go ahead.
In the gritty world of political rhetoric, guilt by association is basically the bread and butter of campaigning.
Oh, definitely.
If I'm an angry voter reading this piece and I already feel somewhat betrayed by this coalition, I'm probably already making that leap in my own head. So does the author really need to spell out the chain of custody for this offer like it's a legal brief?
It is a valid question, because context does dictate style. But we have to ask what the true purpose of this monologue is. If the goal is simply to preach to the choir...
To nod along with people who are already furious?
Exactly. If that's the goal, then sure, the logical leap might survive. But if you want to persuade a voter who is on the fence, or if you want this piece to stand as a robust, airtight critique, you have to close that gap.
Because otherwise, Bennett's defenders can just point out a technicality.
Right. They don't even have to defend his ideology. They can simply say, Segalovitz never accepted the offer, and suddenly your entire dramatic climax collapses.
So the risk of leaving the gap is that you give the target an easy, factual out. You let them argue over the timeline instead of arguing over the morality.
Exact. You give them an escape hatch. So, the suggestion here is to tighten a logical progression by explicitly addressing why an offer made to an associate directly implicates the protagonist.
Shift the focus away from the transaction itself.
Yes, you must shift the narrative focus away from the mere existence of the offer and instead emphasize what the offer signifies about the broader political ecosystem that Bennett has willingly chosen to inhabit.
I like that framing. It's like, if you choose to move into a neighborhood where a cartel feels perfectly comfortable dropping off a welcome basket to your next-door neighbor, your choice of neighborhood is what's actually on trial. You might not have accepted the basket, but you chose the street.
That analogy hits the exact mechanism we are looking for. You are judging the ecosystem he opted into. So for concrete examples of how to implement this, instead of immediately exclaiming what a deep moral decline this situation is right after mentioning the offer, insert a connective thought.
Bind the protagonist to the event.
Exactly. For instance, the author could write something like, the fact that Raam feels comfortable making an offer to Bennett's new political partner shows exactly what kind of ideological neighborhood Bennett has moved into.
Oh, that bridges the gap instantly. It makes a third party's action a direct reflection of Bennett's own judgment.
It does. Alternatively, you could frame it around complicity. You could write, when your top coalition partner is actively courted by the Islamic movement, your silence isn't just passive, it acts as an endorsement of that environment.
Right. We aren't claiming Bennett made the offer.
No, we are arguing that his continued presence in this new reality constitutes the betrayal.
That locks down the argument so tightly that the target just can't squirm out by citing technicality. But that actually creates a new question for me as a reader.
Okay, what's that?
Well, if the logic is operating as a slow, methodical trap, does screaming at the reader from paragraph 1 ruin the element of surprise? Because the author uses incredibly vivid language right out of the gate.
Modulating the emotional intensity of the monologue prevents the audience from experiencing outrage fatigue before the climactic call to action.
Yeah, because within the first few sentences, they are calling the situation a painful moral deterioration, and they reference the ruthless, cheap lie of politics.
Right. They talk about a total loss of the path.
Exactly. My concern is that if the material is already firing on all cylinders at the very start, the reader's going to be exhausted by page 2. Is there a risk of desensitizing them?
Absolutely. The weakness here is a total lack of emotional pacing. The monologue starts at absolute maximum intensity, and it remains at that pitch for the entire duration.
Just heavy phrasing stacked near the beginning.
Yeah. By the time the author circles back to the core historical grievance, which is Bennett becoming prime minister with 6 mandates and allegedly sacrificing his value, the emotional impact is severely diluted.
Because the vocabulary is already so escalated?
Exactly. The reader simply has nowhere left to go emotionally.
It's like sensory adaptation. If you walk into a room that smells overwhelmingly of strong cologne, for the first 10 seconds it is all you can focus on.
Right.
But after a few minutes, your brain just filters it out as background noise. If the text is screaming from the first sentence, the screaming just becomes the baseline hum of the room.
That is exactly how the human brain processes rhetorical emotion. If everything is a 5-alarm fire, nothing is. The actual historical moment of failure doesn't land with the punch it deserves.
But let's look at the alternatives. Because if I am writing this, I might hear that critique and think, okay, so I just need to make the opening boring.
Definitely not boring.
But it's a passionate political monologue, right? Meant for an audience that feels deeply wronged. Isn't the point to grab them by the collar immediately?
Grabbing a reader's attention does not require shouting at them. You can hook someone with a compelling fact without deploying your most emotionally charged adjectives.
So how do you pace it?
The suggestion is to create a deliberate emotional gradient. You want to start with a more analytical, almost disappointed tone regarding the political maneuvering itself.
Lay out the facts first.
Yes, and strictly reserve the harshest, most emotionally charged rhetoric for the final, devastating contrast between Bennett's past promises and his present reality.
So you build a ramp rather than dropping them off a cliff on page 1. You have to earn the outrage.
Exactly. When you earn it methodically, the reader feels it alongside you. For a concrete example, begin the piece with an objective, slightly cynical delivery.
Like what?
You could write, Naftali Bennett has joined forces with Yesh bringing him into the same camp as Yoav Segalovitz. And here is where the political math gets interesting.
Oh, I like that. It sounds like the narrator is about to reveal a secret. It's intellectual.
Precisely. It promises the reader an insight rather than just an insult. Then you walk the reader through the logic we fixed earlier.
The ecosystem he opted into.
Right. As you lay out those undeniable facts, the tension naturally builds. Then you save those heavy-hitting phrases, the total loss of the path, the painful moral deterioration, strictly for the final paragraphs.
You deploy them when you are asking Bennett how he can look his voters in the eyes.
Exactly. When you drop a phrase like painful moral deterioration at the very end, it feels like the inevitable, crushing conclusion of a logical argument.
Because you proved it.
Right. If you drop it in paragraph 1, it just sounds like partisan name-calling.
That makes total sense. The pacing of the words has to match the psychological journey, which brings us to the destination of that journey.
The conclusion.
Yeah, the conclusion. If the gradient is building properly, we have to examine what that finale actually is. Currently, the author advises Bennett to take a pause, step away from the ruthless political life, and remember where he came from.
A concluding call to action carries substantially more weight when it forces the subject into a corner of self-reflection rather than offering a simple rhetorical dismissal.
Yeah, because before that advice, the author uses this brilliant imagery of politics being a sharp, exposed mirror, showing him what he has become.
It's striking visual language.
But then it immediately pivots to giving him retirement advice. Does telling a politician to simply take a break actually leave the audience with a powerful thought, or does it let him off the hook?
Emotionally satisfying for the writer borders on cliché.
Telling a political rival to retire
is basically expected.
It is. It's the most well-worn move in the political playbook, and it diffuses the tension we just built up by offering a generic exit strategy rather than leaving the target grappling with a sharp, unanswerable challenge.
It's literally what opposition members yell across the aisle every single day. Why is it so tempting for writers to use that framing, though?
Because it grants the writer a temporary sense of ultimate authority. It feels powerful to tell a sitting leader to step down.
Right.
But rhetorically, it is actually a position of weakness. You are asking the target to do something they are obviously never going to do. We spent the whole monologue tightening the logic, modulating the emotional gradient, and then at the absolute climax,
We tell him to go take a nap and think about what he did.
exactly. It turns the narrator from a sharp prosecutor into a disappointed parent.
So if you want the audience to remain agitated, you can't just open the pressure valve at the very end.
No, you have to trap them in the pressure cooker. So the suggestion here is to restructure the closing to focus heavily on the irreconcilable paradox of his political identity.
Make the final thought an unresolvable dilemma.
Yes, force the audience to rethink the protagonist's legacy, rather than just giving him retirement advice.
So less, go away. And more, you are trapped in this reality. How would you rewrite that final hook to lock that trap in place? Give us some examples.
You lean entirely into the paradox. Instead of advising a pause, end on an ultimatum. For example, write, you can sit in a room with Yeshatid and those courted by Raam, or you can claim the legacy of the Yesha Council. You cannot do both. It is time to publicly admit which one was the lie.
Oh, wow. Admit which one was the lie. That is a rhetorical box with no doors.
Right.
Because if he says the past was a lie, he defrauded his original voters. If he says the present is a lie, he's a pure opportunist. You aren't asking him to retire. You are asking him to choose his poison.
Exactly. Or we can utilize that brilliant mirror analogy the author already created. We shouldn't waste that image.
Right, it was really good.
So, alternatively, the text could read, don't just take a break from politics. Look into that sharp, exposed mirror and explain to the voters who put you in power why their ideology was nothing more than a stepping stone to a chair.
Instead of letting him walk away from the mirror, you force him to stare into it while the audience watches.
And it demands a justification that the reader knows he cannot provide. That fulfills the true purpose of the piece. The purpose isn't to get him to take a vacation.
Right, he's not going to resign over an op-ed.
The purpose is to align the audience with your specific view of his moral compromise. Ending on a paradox lingers in the listener's mind long after the monologue is over.
It's the difference between closing a book feeling completely satisfied versus staring at the ceiling for an hour because you can't stop thinking about the final question.
That lingering dilemma is exactly what a skilled rhetorical writer should aim for.
Well, this has been an incredibly illuminating breakdown. To briefly summarize the core actions we've laid out today, first, we need to tighten the logical bridge between Segalovitz's offer and Bennett's culpability. The text must explicitly state why third-party actions implicate the main subject by focusing on the political ecosystem rather than just assumed guilt by association.
Second, modulate the emotional pacing. Start with an analytical, disappointed tone to draw the reader in, and escalate to outrage at the very end to avoid outrage fatigue.
And finally, refine the final rhetorical challenge. Swap out the generic retirement advice for an unresolvable paradox that traps the subject in their own contradictions. Give the audience a lingering dilemma. We warmly invite the listener to implement these structural edits and submit the revised work back in for another critique. We'd really love to see how this evolves. Because at the end of the day, when you're prosecuting a case in the court of public opinion, introducing a smoking gun is really only devastating if you can definitively prove the suspect was the one holding it. Outrage might get you into the courtroom, but if you want a conviction, you have to prove exactly whose fingerprints are on the trigger.